The Duke of Ashcombe did not look at his bride once during the wedding vows. Not when she walked down the aisle on her aunt's arm. Not when the ring slipped onto her finger. Not when the vicar pronounced them man and wife before the half-empty pews of St. George's. He signed the register, turned on his heel, and strode from the church before the ink had dried. Eleanor Pembroke stood alone at the altar, in a borrowed green silk, her father 3 weeks in the grave, her family's fortune ruined by a scandal no one in Mayfair would name aloud. She had been purchased, the gossips whispered behind their fans, for the price of his late wife's silence. 4 hours later, a black carriage carried her north, toward a sealed manor no servant had aired in 7 years. Inside her glove, she carried 3 folded pages no one knew she could read. The room smelled of lilac and lamp oil. Silas Pembroke had been dying since Lent. Eleanor had been pretending not to notice since the first thaw. She sat by the bed, held his hand. It felt thinner than the week before. Outside, Boston was finishing its slow turn into June. The Beacon Street elms had gone full leaf. A warm rain was moving through the gutters. The kind of rain that meant the city was about to go quiet for an evening. He coughed, lifted the handkerchief, folded it before she could see. She had already seen, because he had been doing it for 3 weeks. And she had counted the spots. Counting was how she calmed herself. Counting was the language her father had given her at 12. The year their fortune began to crack. The year he sat her at the kitchen table on a Sunday after church and pushed a ledger toward her and said, "One thing and one thing only. Numbers do not lie. People do. Learn the difference." She had learned the difference. Eleanor. He turned his head. His voice was a sheet of dry paper. "Listen. I am listening. Father Boston Maritime. The bonds. They cooked the dividend ledger. 5 years. Atchut, I never saw it. You knew. I checked the third quarter accounts last summer. The numbers did not sit right." His face did something that was almost a smile. "Why did you not tell me? Because you would have died sooner if you had known." He laughed. It hurt him. He laughed anyway. His hand tightened on hers. "As much as it could. You read the numbers, Elle. That is all I ever managed to teach you. Be the woman who reads the numbers. Anywhere they put you. Anywhere they send you. Read the numbers." I will. The clock on the mantel ticked. The fire burned low. A horse passed in the street, then another, then nothing. He died at 8:20. She closed his eyes. She wound the mantel clock. She did not cry. She would cry later. She had a list of things to do first. The list took her 3 days. She went to the bank and canceled her father's account. She went to the landlord and surrendered the lease on the Beacon Street rooms. She wrote letters to 2 cousins in Salem and 1 aunt in Cambridge announcing the funeral. She drafted the death notice for the transcript herself, because she did not trust anyone else to keep it brief. On the 4th day, she sat in the kitchen of the apartment they had once afforded. She counted what was left. $43 in the household tin. A pewter tea service that would fetch perhaps 30 more. Her mother's wedding ring on a chain around her neck. Her father's pocket watch on the mantel. A leather journal she had been writing in since she was 16. No inheritance. Boston Maritime had seen to that. No protector. 2 cousins in Salem who had not answered her 3 letters. An aunt in Cambridge with troubles of her own. A few friends from a girlhood that had ended when the money did. There was, however, an offer. The offer had arrived 11 days before her father died. A letter to him, addressed in a hand meant to be reassuring. A merchant named Theodore Caldwell, North Shore, paper mill, a country estate in rural Massachusetts, widower 7 years. A man, the letter said, who required a wife of good name and quiet manner. A man willing to be generous with the family that provided one. Her father had read the letter aloud from the bed. He had laughed. The laugh had hurt him then too. The laugh had said, "Do not even think about it, Elle." And her eyes had said nothing back, because she had already begun to think about it. On the 4th day, she picked up the letter again. She read it through twice. Then she found a clean sheet of paper. She copied out, in her own careful hand, 3 pages of Massachusetts statute governing married women's property rights. She folded the pages. She put them in her pocket. She walked to her Aunt Cora's house in Cambridge and asked her aunt to write the reply. Cora was the kind of woman who could alter a dress in 3 days if a niece needed marrying off. She did not look up from her hand when Eleanor came in. She did not ask any of the questions a softer aunt might have asked. She simply listened. Then she set her needle aside and went to the writing desk. You understand what you are doing. I do. You understand. The man is taking you because he will stay out of the wife and look respectable at functions he does not attend. I do. You understand he buried the first one and closed her house behind him and has not slept under that roof since. I read the letter twice. Cora picked up her pen. Then I will write the reply. She wrote it that afternoon. Eleanor sealed it herself. The reply went out by post the next morning. The acceptance came back 4 days later. The wedding was set for the 3rd Saturday in July, 6 weeks. 6 weeks to take a green silk out of Cora's wardrobe and alter it for a niece who was thinner than her aunt and taller by an inch. 6 weeks to pack a trunk. 6 weeks to teach herself the names of the rooms in a house she had never seen. From a hand-drawn floor plan, a clerk had enclosed with the contract. 6 weeks to write down everything her father had ever taught her about reading a ledger when the writer did not want it read. She used the time well. The 3rd Saturday in July arrived hot and cloudless. Eleanor stood in front of the mirror in Cora's spare room at 6 in the morning. The green silk had been altered 3 times. It still did not fit at the shoulder. Cora pulled the seam in and out and in again, with the practical hands of a woman who had long ago decided perfect was the enemy of done. You look very fine, Elle. I look like a woman in someone else's dress. You are a woman in someone else's dress. Cora pinned the last fold. Stepped back. He will not be looking at the dress. He will not be looking at me either. Cora did not contradict her. The church on Tremont Street was 3/4 empty. A handful of Cora's acquaintances, a clerk from the paper mill, the minister in a black coat that had been pressed that morning. There were no Caldwell relatives in the pews. There were no friends of the groom. The clerk was sitting alone in the 3rd row, writing something in a small book. She walked down the aisle on Cora's arm. Because no man in her family was alive to walk her, Theodore was already at the altar. She saw him from behind first, tall, lean, a coat she would later learn cost what her father had once earned in 2 months. He did not turn when she came in. He turned only when the minister cleared his throat. She got 2 seconds of his face. It was a face that had once been open and had been closed by something. Not unkind, not cruel, absent. As if the man who lived behind it had moved out years ago and left the lights off. The minister did the work. Theodore did not look at her at the vows. Not at the rings. Not at the moment when he was supposed to lift the veil. He signed the register with a hand that did not shake. He turned. He walked. He did not look back. The church door closed behind him before the ink on the register had dried. Cora reached for her arm. The sound she made was small. The kind a woman makes when she has realized her best effort was not enough. Eleanor did not flinch. She did not turn to watch him go. She had made herself a promise that morning in front of the mirror. 1 sentence. She had said it out loud to hear it out loud. I will not disappear for anyone. She signed the register herself. She handed the pen to the witness. She walked down the aisle on Cora's arm, a married woman who had been a married woman for approximately 8 minutes, and had been seen by her husband for approximately 2 seconds. The carriage came for her at 3. The driver did not speak. Mr. Caldwell's instructions, he said when he loaded her trunk. Mrs. Hayes will receive you. She pressed her hand to the window, watched the road change, cobblestone to dirt, town to fields, fields to woods, woods to more woods. The light went thin, then orange, then gray, 4 hours, then 5. She did not cry in the carriage. She had decided in front of the mirror that she would not cry today, and she did not. She did, however, do something she had not done in a long time. She took the 3 folded pages of Massachusetts statutes out of her coat pocket and read them through. Slowly, the way a soldier reads a map before a march. The carriage turned through an iron gate at 4:30. The gate had not been oiled in some time. The hinges complained. The driver kept his eyes forward. Then she saw it. Caldwell Manor at the end of a long gravel drive. 3 stories of dark brick. Every shutter sealed. The oaks along the drive had grown so thick into each other that their branches nearly closed the sky. She had expected neglect. This was something else. This was a house that had been told to stop, and had obeyed. The front steps were cracked. The brass door knocker had gone green. A loose shutter on the second floor moved once in the warm July wind and made a hollow wooden clap against the frame. That sound was the only greeting she received. The driver lifted her trunk down, set it on the gravel. He did not look at her. He handed her a sealed letter from his coat. Then he had climbed back onto the box and turned the horses without a word. She watched the carriage go. She did not move until it disappeared past the gate. Then she broke the seal. The letter was 3 sentences. Caldwell Manor is at your disposal. Mrs. Hayes will show you the household accounts. I will be in Boston until further notice. No signature. Not even an initial. She folded it, slid it into her coat pocket, picked up her trunk. She was still holding it when the front door opened. The woman who stood in the doorway was perhaps 60. Small, iron-gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her eyes moved over Eleanor from hem to hat brim, roughly 4 seconds, and arrived at a verdict, Mrs. Caldwell. The tone made it sound like a question. Mrs. Hayes had not yet decided whether to ask Mrs. Hayes. I believe you were expecting me. I was told to expect you. There was a difference in those 2 phrases. Mrs. Hayes made sure Eleanor heard it. Come in. Mind the second step. It gives. She minded the second step. The inside of Caldwell Manor was dark in the way old grief is dark. Not absence of light, exactly. A heaviness that had settled so long it had become part of the plaster. Holland. Covers draped the furniture in the front parlor, like sheets on a row of small corpses. A grandfather clock in the hallway had stopped at 11:20. Nobody had seen fit to wind it. Dust lay across the mantel shelf thick enough to write your name in. She suspected that if she tried, she would find names already there, written by other hands, in other seasons. Never wiped clean. The household staff. Mrs. Hayes moved through the hallway with the efficient step of a woman who had long since made peace with an unpleasant assignment. Consists of myself, Thomas, the groundskeeper's boy, Martha, who manages the kitchen, and Henry, who sees to the horses. That is all. That is all. For a house this size, Mr. Caldwell did not see a need for more. Eleanor looked up the main staircase. The banister was solid walnut. Beautiful work. A section of carpet on the 3rd step had pulled loose from its rod, and no one had tacked it down. How long has the house been in this condition? Mrs. Hayes' jaw tightened. The house has been maintained within Mr. Caldwell's stated requirements. I am not criticizing Mrs. Hayes. I am asking a question. A pause. 7 years. Eleanor looked at the clock again. 11:20. She wondered what had happened at that hour. Whether Theodore Caldwell even remembered he had left the clock there. Or whether he had simply stopped looking at it the same day he had stopped looking at everything else. I would like to see the household accounts. Mrs. Hayes blinked. Tonight. If you can manage it, most women in your situation would want to see their rooms first. I will see my rooms too. Accounts first. Mrs. Hayes did not move for a moment. Her face did something that was not quite reassessment, but was its first cousin. This way, the dining rooms was closed. Mrs. Hayes opened it briefly so Eleanor could see. The table was covered, the shutters sealed. The air inside had the still papery quality of a room no one had breathed in for half a decade. We have not used this since. I understand. The library. Mrs. Hayes opened that door too. Same condition. Books on the shelves. Holland covers on the chairs. A reading desk near the window, with a small framed silhouette of a woman in profile, turned face down on its surface. Eleanor noted the silhouette. She did not comment on it. The kitchen they passed through last. Martha was there, 40 years old, heavy shoulders, a face that had decided long ago it would not be surprised by anything Caldwell Manor produced. She did not curtsy. She nodded once. Ma, Martha, I will be eating in the kitchen tonight. Yes, ma'am. She had not asked Mrs. Hayes' opinion. She had simply stated it. Mrs. Hayes did not contradict her either. Her room was on the second floor, east-facing, which meant it would catch the morning light. If anyone ever opened the shutters, no one had the bedroom was clean. Mrs. Hayes kept it, whatever else might be said, but it felt provisional. The bed made with plain white linen, a writing desk with no paper, a fireplace that had not been laid, a wardrobe with bare shelves. No vanity mirror. She set her trunk down, opened it herself, began to unpack. 4 dresses, 2 pairs of stockings, her sewing kit, her mother's Bible, the leather journal, the folded sheet of Massachusetts statutes. She placed the statutes on the writing desk, next to the journal. Then she stood back, looked at the room. All right, she said it to no one, quietly. Like a foreman about to start a job. Let us begin. The house Eleanor was beginning to understand was a body that had been holding its breath for 7 years. She did not yet know what would happen when it exhaled. She suspected she was about to find out. She put her hand on the case of the clock as she passed it on her way down to supper. Briefly, not long enough to mean anything. Long enough to register that the wood was still warm. A clock that had stopped was not a broken clock. A clock that had stopped was simply waiting. She kept walking. She ate in the kitchen at the work table. Martha set a bowl of stew in front of her without speaking. Eleanor nodded thanks. Martha blinked. The blink contained information. Apparently nods of thanks were not standard currency in this house. The accounts after supper, Mrs. Hayes. I meant it. The accounts were 3 ledger books. Mrs. Hayes spread them on the kitchen table under the lamp. Then she sat across from Eleanor with her arms folded, watching Eleanor read. She did not say anything for the first hour. She did not need to. The numbers spoke clearly enough. Most of the entries were normal, properly maintained at the surface level. The kind of bookkeeping a moderately competent housekeeper could produce for a moderately attentive employer. Vegetable accounts, coal, wages, repairs, taxes paid, stock dividends received and properly noted. But there were threads. 3 of the Boston suppliers ran about 15% higher than competitors would have charged. Not enough to be obvious. Enough over 4 years to add up. A quarterly payment to a firm called Sinclair and Associates appeared on the first page of every quarter, marked as estate management. No invoice, no itemization, just the figure. She turned to the timber ledger. 40 cords of hardwood reported sold annually from the North Acreage. The receipts that had come back into the estate operating fund were less than half what 40 cords should have brought at Massachusetts market rates. She looked at this for a long time. Mrs. Hayes did not move. Eleanor turned the page, then the next, then back. She drew her own journal from her bag and copied the figures in her careful hand. When the lamp had burned half its oil, she closed the second book. Mrs. Hayes, yes. How long has Sinclair and Associates been collecting this management fee? Silence. Eleanor looked up. Mrs. Hayes's expression had gone very still. 4 years near enough. Who authorized it? It was in place when I arrived as housekeeper. I assumed Mr. Caldwell. Did you ever see a contract? Another silence. Longer. No. Eleanor wrote a number in her own journal. Underlined it. I am not accusing anyone in this house, Mrs. Hayes. Whatever is happening here was happening before you, and likely before anyone still left in this household. But you think something is happening. I think someone has been very patient, very quiet, very confident. No one would ever look too closely at these accounts. She wrote a second number. Then she looked at Mrs. Hayes directly. They miscalculated. She did not sleep that first night, not properly. She lay in the dark in a bed that was not hers, in a room that did not know her, and listened to the house breathe. Old wood settling, a shutter somewhere knocking softly, the wind in the oaks. She thought about her father, about the kitchen table in Boston, about the way he had pushed a ledger toward her at 12, the only honest language in the world. She thought about the clock in the hallway, 11:20. She wondered, in the part of the night where wondering is the only thing left to do, what time he had wound it last, whether it had stopped on its own, or whether the day his first wife died he had walked into the hallway and stopped it himself, by hand, and then walked out. She fell asleep around 4. She woke at 5:45. By 6 she had washed and dressed, and was at the kitchen table with the lamp lit, and the first ledger open again. Martha did not look surprised to see her. Martha set down a coffee cup without being asked. Martha had apparently been the kind of person who got up first her entire life and had been waiting quietly for the new mistress to show whether she was the same kind or not. The kitchen at 6 in the morning is the most honest room in any house. Eleanor had learned that from her father. He had said it the way he said most things, as if it were obvious, as if everyone knew. She had taken 30 years to understand he was the only person she had ever met who treated it as obvious. The coffee was good. The lamp was steady. The numbers were still in the same order they had been the night before. She began the work. By the second morning, she had identified 2 more discrepancies. A series of small disbursements to a stable in Boston for the upkeep of 2 horses that had apparently been kept there for the past 3 years. She found no record of the horses in the estate's stable inventory. She found no instructions in the estate file authorizing their purchase or their care. She wrote that down too. The list was getting longer. She kept the journal in her room at night. She carried it with her during the day. She wrote in a hand small enough that no servant glancing past could read it. She kept her father's voice in her head while she worked. The use of the room was not love. The use of the room was not safety. The use was work. She would take the work. The third evening she set down her pen. Mrs. Hayes had been waiting in the doorway for 10 minutes. Eleanor had been aware of her there. Eleanor had finished her column. She had drawn the underline. She'd capped the pen. Now she looked up. "Sit down, Mrs. Hayes." Mrs. Hayes sat. "I am going to tell you what I have found. I want you to listen all the way through before you say anything. Then I want you to tell me whether you have ever seen evidence to contradict any of it." "Yes, ma'am," she told her. "The Sinclair payments, the timber receipts, the Boston suppliers, the horses she could not locate." She gave it to her in sequence. Not as accusation, as information. Mrs. Hayes listened all the way through. She did not interrupt. When Eleanor finished, she sat for almost a minute without speaking. Then she said very quietly, "I have served this family 31 years, I know. I came to this house when the first Mrs. Caldwell was alive. I served her 7 years. I have served Mr. Caldwell 17 years since. I have been managing this household for the entirety of his absence. I have done my work. I have kept what could be kept. I have not, until tonight, ever been asked a question I could not answer. I am not accusing you. I know." A long pause. "I have not been the question. I have been the answer that no one was reading. There is a difference." Eleanor closed the journal. "There is." She did not push further that night. She did not need to. Mrs. Hayes had said something she could not unsay, and they both knew it, in Boston. The same week, the story of Theodore Caldwell's new wife was being shaped in a parlor on Mount Vernon Street. The shaper was a woman named Beatrice Sinclair, 32 years old, tall, the daughter of the principal C.At Sinclair and Associates, the woman who had been writing to Theodore for 11 years, and had, for the last 3 of them, been writing to him as a friend who was something more than a friend on every Sunday afternoon when his clerk did not check his correspondence. She had a gift for stories, for trimming them, for smoothing out the parts that might generate sympathy and sharpening the parts that generated contempt. She told the story of Eleanor Pembroke over tea, with her usual brand of bright sorrowful candor, the kind that made the listener feel they were being confided in rather than poisoned. Of course, Theod felt some obligation. She set down her cup. Her father and Silas Pembroke did business years ago. It was a kindness, really. He has given her a house and a title, and she ought to be grateful. Across the table, her cousin nodded along the way. Cousins paid by inheritance nod along. Though I understand she is already making a nuisance of herself up at the Hollow. The housekeeper wrote to say she has been going through ledgers. A small musical laugh. What would a woman like that know about estate accounts? Beatrice reached for another biscuit, smiled at the window. She had been confident from the moment she heard the name Pembroke that the entire matter would resolve itself within a month. The girl would find the isolation intolerable and retreat. Theodore would come to his senses. Things would return to the arrangement they had been moving toward for 3 years. Before his inconvenient conscience had intervened, she was not worried. She simply kept watch. What she did not know, what no one in Boston had thought to mention, was that Silas Pembroke had taught his daughter double-entry bookkeeping at a kitchen table when she was 12 years old, and had called it the most honest language in the world. The information was not the kind that traveled in parlors. It traveled, when it traveled at all, only as far as the man it had been said to could carry it, and Silas Pembroke had carried it as far as he was going to carry it. Then he had handed it to his daughter and died. The daughter had it now. The daughter was in a kitchen in rural Massachusetts at 6 in the morning with a lamp and a pen, and a column of numbers that did not add the way someone in Boston had told them to add. Beatrice Sinclair was about to learn what that meant. That was the not yet. Eleanor was counting on. By the end of the first week, Mrs. Hayes had begun to do small things. She did not announce them. She did not explain. She simply began. She brought tea to the east parlor on the 5th morning unprompted. She mentioned, casually, in the corridor outside the library, that the dining room curtains were salvageable if anyone wanted them taken down and beaten. She left on the third evening a small typed inventory of the estate's key cabinet on Eleanor's desk, with a note in the margin that said, "This is everything I know about," which Eleanor took to mean Mrs. Hayes was beginning to suspect there were things she did not know about, which was, Eleanor thought, the start of any honest accounting. They did not speak about Sinclair again that week. They did not need to. The work was being done. She found the garden on the 8th day. Not that the garden was hidden. It sat behind the house in full view, but 7 years of untended growth had reclaimed it so completely that it was easy to mistake it for more wilderness. She walked through a gap in an overgrown privet hedge and found herself standing in the middle of what had once been a formal kitchen garden. Stone paths, buried under weeds, a central well choked with climbing vine, raised herb beds with edging stones lost in grass and thistle. Against the south wall, a row of what had been espaliered apple trees, now grown wild and graceless, their trained branches gone to tangle. She stood very still. Then she heard footsteps on gravel. Thomas, 17, broad-shouldered, uncomfortable with conversation. He had been following her at a respectful distance for the past half hour, without once announcing himself. "You knew this was here?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why did no one tend it a pause?" "Mortar Caldwell said to leave it." She looked at the apple trees. They were still alive. She could see new growth in the tangle, green, persistent, fighting through 7 years of being left behind. She counted them while Thomas waited. 28. She turned to him. "Thomas, do you know how to prune?" He looked up. "My father taught me before he stopped." "Yes, ma'am. I know how." "Good. We have work to do." She did not tell Mrs. Hayes that night. She did not write anything in the journal. She simply asked Thomas to start the next morning. He started at first light. By the third afternoon, she could hear the snip of his shears from the kitchen window, that patient, steady. The sound of one boy and a pair of clippers refusing to give up on 28 apple trees the world had decided were finished. She walked out to the orchard that afternoon. Stood at the first tree he had finished. Put her hand on the bark. Will they fruit? Not this year. Maybe a few. Next year, the strong ones. Year after, they will produce proper. How old are these trees? 30 years. Maybe more. Whoever planted them knew what they were doing. Who planted them? Thomas hesitated. He always hesitated before saying anything about the family. Like, he was not sure for which sentences were allowed in his mouth. The first Mrs. Caldwell. She did the planting. She kept the orchard. My father said she would walk this row every morning before breakfast. The first Mrs. Caldwell, Margaret. The name had not come up in the ledgers. The name had not come up in Mrs. Hayes's summaries. The name had come up exactly once. In a kitchen conversation about a clock, Thomas. How did she die? A longer pause this time. Influenza. The bad winter. Mr. Caldwell was in Boston when she took ill. He came back. She lived 2 more days. He closed the house the week after. Closed it himself. Yes, ma'am. Walked through every room with my father. Put the Holland covers on with his own hands. Stopped the clock himself. Eleanor kept her palm on the bark a moment longer than she meant to. She felt the tree decide to be alive. Felt the small heat of it under her hand. A 30-year-old tree that had survived 7 years of being told to stop. Keep working the row, Thomas. We finish this wall by the end of the week. Yes, ma'am. She walked back to the house. She did not write any of it down. Some information was not for the journal. Some information was for the quiet part of the day when the lamp was already out and the work was already done. That evening she sat at the desk in the east parlor for a long time without writing. She had her father's voice in her head. She had Margaret Caldwell's name in her head, too. A woman she had never met. A woman who had walked an orchard every morning. A woman who had been waited out and forgotten by everyone except a 17-year-old groundskeeper's boy who had been small when she died and could still tell you which row she had favored. She was beginning to understand the shape of what she was in inside. She was inside a house that 2 people had loved. Margaret first. Then someone she did not yet know who had loved the bones of the place enough that a stranger walking into it could still feel that love trying to surface through the dust. She did not write any of that down either, but she added a small line at the back of the journal, in the margin, where she kept the things that were not yet evidence, 28 trees still alive. Margaret planted them. She picked the south wall on purpose. Then she closed the book. The 11th morning Mrs. Hayes came to the kitchen at 6:30. She did not take her usual seat at the opposite end of the table. She sat across from Eleanor. She placed a folded document between them. What is this? Write it. Eleanor unfolded the paper, smoothed it flat. It was a letter, 3 years old, written on Sinclair and Associates stationery, addressed to a property agent in Boston, discussing the potential acquisition of the north acreage of an estate in rural Massachusetts, whose current owner was described as disengaged from management. The estate was Caldwell Manor. The disengaged owner was Theodore Caldwell. She read it twice. Then she placed it flat on the table, pressed both hands on it, as if to hold it still. Where did you find this? Back of the linen cupboard, behind the Christmas tablecloths. I was rotating them out for summer storage. The letter was tucked between the 3rd and 4th fold of the largest cloth. How long has it been there? I do not know. The cloths get rotated twice a year, spring and autumn. I have been doing them for 9 years. I never noticed it before. Eleanor looked at the letter again. Someone hid this here, on purpose, in a place where it would only be found if someone was looking for it, or if someone had stopped trusting their own assumptions about which cupboards were safe. Mrs. Hayes's face was unreadable. I do not know how it got there. I do not know if Mr. Caldwell ever saw it, but I know what it means. It means someone has been planning to take this estate. Yes, not steal it outright. That would have been noticed. Drain it, undervalue it, document it as a failing property. Then purchase it when the owner finally let go. Yes. She folded the letter very carefully, slid it into her journal, between the page of property statutes and the page where she had written the figures from the 3rd night. He is not going to let go. Mrs. Hayes blinked. Mr. Caldwell. He married me and sent me here, and walked away from this whole house because he does not know what he still has worth keeping. Someone has been counting on that. Someone has been very carefully making sure he stays away, and stays disengaged, and never looks too closely. She closed the journal. I looked. Mrs. Hayes sat back, her arms uncrossed. She looked at Eleanor in a way she had not yet looked at her. Mrs. Caldwell, Eleanor. Mrs. Hayes paused. The change of name took her a moment to settle into. Then she settled into it. Eleanor. You are going to need help. I know. Then you have it. It was the closest thing to a vow Eleanor had received in 11 days of marriage. She took it the way she would have taken a contract, quietly, without ceremony, with the understanding that what mattered now was what they did after. She spent that morning in the East Parlor making a chart. Not for the journal, for herself. In the first column she wrote everyone with access to the linen cupboard. Mrs. Hayes, Martha. Anyone Mrs. Hayes had ever asked to help with the seasonal rotation. The list was short. Mrs. Hayes and Martha and 2-day workers who had not been at the house in 4 years. In the second column she wrote who had access to the library. Mrs. Hayes again. Theodore himself when he visited. Anyone Theodore had ever brought up from Boston. Anyone with the key to the estate cabinet. In the third column she wrote the dates that figures had begun shifting in the ledgers. The earliest was the autumn 4 years prior. The pattern had hardened the following spring. She looked at the 3 columns. The intersection was small, very small. The intersections contained 2 names and 1 set of unknowns. She did not write down what she saw at the intersection. She would not write that until she had more. In the back of the journal. The second letter from Boston arrived that afternoon. It was addressed to her. The handwriting was elegant in a way that had been practiced, which told you something about the writer before you read a word. Dear Mrs. Caldwell, I hope you are finding the country air restorative. I understand Caldwell Manor can be rustic for those unaccustomed to rural Massachusetts. I write only to introduce myself, as I have been a close friend to the Caldwell family for many years, and would not wish there to be any awkwardness between us. Should you have need of guidance regarding Boston society or the Caldwell name's proper social obligations, I am always available to advise. I do hope you will consider the wisdom of discretion in all matters pertaining to the estate. Some things are better left to those with longer familiarity with the family's affairs. With warmest regards, Miss Beatrice Sinclair. Eleanor read it through. Then she set it on the desk beside the letter Mrs. Hayes had brought her that morning, threat and threat. 2 pieces of paper. She did not write back. She picked up the pen and wrote, in her journal, a single line. She is moving sooner than I expected. Then she went to the window and looked out at the south wall. Thomas had finished his 4th tree of the day. The shape of the row was beginning to declare itself, not as it had been 30 years ago, as what it would be in another year. She watched him for a long time. Then she turned back to the desk and began to draft the letter to Whitfield. The letter took her 3 drafts. The first was too formal, the kind of language that put men on the defensive before they finished the first paragraph. The second was too deferential, the kind of language that made men assume the writer needed assistance rather than information. The third she wrote the way her father had taught her to write back when they still had enough money for him to be teaching her anything. Plainly, specifically, every important fact laid out before the request itself. So the request appeared not as a petition but as the obvious conclusion of the page that preceded it. Dear Judge Whitfield, I am writing in my capacity as Mrs. Theodore Caldwell. Having recently assumed management of the Caldwell Manor estate in rural Massachusetts, in reviewing the household accounts, I have identified several irregularities which will require legal clarification. Then the list. 4 years of unauthorized quarterly payments to Sinclair and Associates. Below-market timber receipts on the north acreage. A 3-year-old letter found in this house discussing the potential acquisition of estate lands. I would be grateful for your guidance regarding the proper legal procedures for investigating potential mismanagement of estate funds under Massachusetts statute and any protections available to the estate principal. She did not address her connection to her father in the letter. She did not need to. Judge Alfred Whitfield had handled Caldwell legal affairs for 3 generations. He had also, 15 years ago, represented one of her father's creditors in a small dispute Silas had eventually settled. He would know the Pembroke name. He would form whatever opinion of it he formed. She did not want to ask him to set that opinion aside. She wanted to give him a letter whose contents made the opinion irrelevant. She sealed it. She gave it to Henry at first light. She did not tell Mrs. Hayes, because she did not yet know whether silence was a courtesy or a weapon. So she chose silence, and reserved the right to call it whatever she needed to call it later. Henry took 2 days getting to Boston and back. He returned with a small bundle of post that included one letter on a heavy cream stuff she recognized from her father's old files, Whitfield's office stationery. The letter was from his clerk, not from the judge. Brief, acknowledging receipt of her correspondence, advising that Judge Whitfield would be available to meet at his Boston office at her convenience. The matters she had described were, in the clerk's carefully chosen language, worthy of review. She read it twice, set it aside. 2 words, worthy of review. She rolled them around in her mouth. They tasted like a door that had just been propped open. She placed the letter inside the journal, next to Beatrice's first letter, next to the acquisition document. That night at supper she told Mrs. Hayes. Mrs. Hayes did not ask why she had not been told before the letter was sent. Mrs. Hayes asked only one question. What does the clerk's language mean? It means Whitfield read the letter himself. It means he found enough in it to direct his clerk to keep the door open. It means we are not going to be dismissed as a misunderstanding. Mrs. Hayes set down her spoon. I have known Alfred Whitfield in passing for 20 years. I have never known him to use the word review unless he intended to do one. Then we are in for one. Yes, a pause. The kitchen lamp hissed. The cicadas were going outside. The house, which 2 weeks ago had felt like a vault, was beginning to feel like a house that had been packed for shipment and was now being unpacked. Mrs. Hayes did not address the change directly. She addressed it sideways. The dining room curtains can come down on Friday, if I have your permission. They will take a full afternoon to beat, and a full day to rehang. Henry can help with the rod, take them down on Friday. Use whatever help you need. Yes, ma'am. It was the smallest possible alliance. A pair of curtains, but she understood what was being offered. Mrs. Hayes was opening a room. The first one she had been the active agent in opening since Theodore had walked the halls 8 years ago, putting the Holland covers on with his own hands. Eleanor accepted the offering at its weight and did not comment on it. She went up to bed that night and did not sleep for an hour because her mind was running the next steps. The conversation with Whitfield she would eventually need to have. The materials she would need to bring to it. The questions she would need to be ready to answer. The questions she would need to be ready to ask. She did not yet know what kind of man Judge Whitfield was beyond his office stationery and his choice of clerk and his use of one word in his clerk's reply. She knew enough. She fell asleep thinking about her father's voice, the particular tone he had used the first time he had explained double entry to her. Each transaction has 2 sides, he had said. He had said it the way other fathers might have said grace at dinner. Every entry on one side must have a corresponding entry on the other. If they do not balance, somebody is hiding something. Somebody was hiding something at Caldwell Manor. She had begun, very slowly, to make their sides balance. Thomas came through the kitchen door at midday on the 17th day, with his shirt soaked through from running. Eleanor was at the table with Mrs. Hayes going over the dairy accounts, the north fence. What about it? 3 posts pulled. Not fallen, pulled. The section that borders the timber acreage line. She set down the pen. Show me. She followed him to the north boundary, half a mile through the upper meadow, the grass to her knee, the summer heat rising off the field. Cicadas in the trees like a slow tide. She saw exactly what he meant. 3 posts that had been standing 2 days prior. She had walked the line herself on the morning of the 11th day. She knew their positions. They were gone. Not rotted through. Not storm damaged. The ground around the holes disturbed in the specific way. Ground is disturbed when something is extracted deliberately. Who has been on this property? Nobody I have seen. But I was not watching the north line every hour. Eleanor looked at the gap. Beyond it, the timber acreage stretched into summer green. Old hardwood. Sections of original growth she could see through the trees. worth considerably more than the receipts in the ledger had ever suggested. Jim wants this line to look disputed. Ma'am, if the posts are missing, the boundary becomes harder to prove without survey records. And if the boundary is disputed. She stopped. She did not need to finish the sentence. She pulled a measuring cord from her work apron, marked the position of each missing post with stones from the field edge, measured, sketched it on the back page of the journal, noted distances, noted angles, noted the position of the nearest standing post on either side, the names of the witness trees she had read in the surveys. If someone wanted this line to look uncertain, she was to make certain it looked like anything. But Thomas watched her work. Ma'am. Yes, my father walked this line every year when he was groundskeeper. Before he died, he knew the posts by name. I learned them from him. I can put them back if you want. Not yet, not yet. Not until they come back here and find that someone has been documenting their work. Thomas understood. She could see him understand. He had grown up in this house. He had watched his father grow old in this house. He knew what the trees were worth. He knew what the line meant. Yes, ma'am. She straightened, closed the journal. Thomas, where are the original property survey documents? I do not know, ma'am. Ask Mrs. Hayes tonight. Do not ask tomorrow. Tonight, the survey documents were in the library. Mrs. Hayes found them in a chest. A chest in a room Eleanor had not yet fully opened, which now felt like a mistake. Inside a locked box whose key was on a ring with 6 others hanging in the back of the estate key cabinet. Eleanor spread the papers on the library table. The documents were original, signed, stamped, dated 1797. The boundary of every parcel of Caldwell Manor's 240 acres laid out in specific and unmistakable terms. The North Timber acreage among them. A surveyor's mark every 200 feet along the line. The angles recorded. The witness trees noted by species and circumference. She read it through twice. Every word. Then she rolled it carefully, wrapped it in oilcloth, carried it upstairs herself, and put it in the chest at the foot of her bed. Mrs. Hayes stood in the library doorway when she came back down. Anyone else know these were in the chest? I knew. I do not know who else did. From now on they are in my room. Mrs. Hayes nodded. Mrs. Hayes, I need you to think carefully. Yes. Over the past 4 years, has anyone been inside this house claiming a legitimate-sounding reason? Anyone representing Sinclair or Associates? Anyone claiming to inspect the property? She was quiet for a long moment. 2 years ago. A man who said he was from the county assessor's office. He came to review the property records. I let him into the library. Did he leave with anything? Nothing I saw him take. A pause. But he was in the room alone for nearly half an hour. Eleanor looked at the empty space on the chest's interior where the oilcloth roll had lived untouched for 7 years. He would have found them. He would have known exactly where they were and what they contained. He just did not take them, because taking them would have been noticed. He only needed to know they existed. She closed the chest, locked it, slipped the key onto the chain she already wore around her neck. No one enters this library without me present, for any reason, even if Mr. Caldwell returns. Especially if Mr. Caldwell returns. Yes, ma'am, whoever sent that assessor knew the layout of this house, the location of every document, the schedule of every staff member, information he could not have collected by visiting once. Mrs. Hayes did not blink. You think he had a source. I think he is still having one. Or he was. Until very recently. A pause. You think there is still someone reporting back not from this household. The pattern of the figures is too consistent. If a current staff member were reporting, the pattern would have changed when Martha's daughter married, and Martha took the week off in March. The figures did not change then. The figures changed only when Theodore Caldwell stopped reading them. Mrs. Hayes considered this. The source was him. The source was his absence. A quiet settled in the library. Mrs. Hayes spoke very slowly. That is a particular kind of cruelty. It is the kind that pays the best. Eleanor closed the library door behind them. She put the key for the room into her pocket. She wrote in her journal that night, in the back margin where she kept the things that were not yet evidence. He has not been the source. He has been the door. They walked through him. Then she closed the book and slept badly. The man at the front door came on a Tuesday, early August. He wore a Boston merchant coat in summer wool, 40 years old. The specific confidence of a man who had not in his adult life been told no by anyone he considered worth hearing it from. He gave Henry his card without looking at him. He asked for Mr. Caldwell. When Henry said Mr. Caldwell was not in residence, he asked for the estate agent. When Henry said there was no estate agent, he paused, then said with the air of a man improvising a minor inconvenience that he would speak to whoever was managing the property. Eleanor received him in the east parlor, standing. She did not invite him to sit. He looked around the open, cleaned room, the uncovered furniture, the open windows, the fresh arrangement of garden herbs in a clay pot on the side table. His face did the work of a man recalibrating his expectations. Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Crane. I represent Sinclair and Associates. I am aware. Then you will understand the nature of my visit. We manage several interests connected to this estate, and it has come to our attention that there may be some confusion regarding the accounting records. There is no confusion. The accounts are quite clear, Crane smiled. It was the smile of a man trained to smile at difficult women as a technique for reducing them. Eleanor had seen the smile before. 3 of her father's creditors had used it on her after the Boston maritime collapse. She had been 22 then. She had not flinched then either. I think perhaps, with a fresh set of eyes, some of the figures could be irregular when in fact Mr. Crane. He stopped. She did not raise her voice. It did not need to rise. I have copied every ledger entry dating back 4 years. I have documented the discrepancy between the timber receipts and current Massachusetts market rates. I have identified the quarterly management fees and noted the absence of any executed contract authorizing them. And I have been in correspondence with Judge Alfred Whitfield's office regarding the proper legal procedures for reviewing potential estate mismanagement. Crane's smile did not disappear. But something behind it did. Judge Whitfield. Judge Whitfield. A longer pause, the kind that meant a man was redoing arithmetic in his head and getting a different answer than he had walked in with Mr. Caldwell. I think it would be prudent for you to speak with your husband before taking any actions that could complicate the estate's established relationships. My husband sent me here to manage this household. I am managing it. If Sinclair and Associates has a legitimate contract with this estate, I'll expect a copy delivered to this house within the week. If no contract exists, the quarterly payments will cease effective immediately, and Judge Whitfield will receive a full account of the discrepancies. Crane looked at her, reassessing. She could see the cold calculations behind his eyes. The arithmetic of a man who had just realized this was going to be harder than he had planned. I will relay your position to my principals. Please do. He hesitated at the door. He had one more thing to try. She could see him choosing the words, Mrs. Caldwell. You are new to the Caldwell family. You do not yet understand how the affairs of an estate of this size are properly managed. There are people in Boston who have given a great deal to maintain the dignity of this house through a difficult period for its owner. I would ask only that you consider whether the manner in which you are proceeding is fair to those people. It was the same speech, in a different jacket, that the man from her father's creditor had given her at 22. She had a reply ready then. She had a better one now. Mr. Crane, I have considered it. I have decided I do not owe fairness to people who have used a man's grief as a line item. He did not have a reply for that one. She did not see him out. Henry did. Mrs. Hayes appeared in the parlor doorway 4 seconds after the front door closed. I was in the hall. I know. He came from Sinclair. Yes. What will they do next? Eleanor looked at the empty chair Crane had not been offered. Something faster than they have been moving. Something messier. They thought 4 years of patience would buy them this estate quietly. Patience just stopped working for them. She walked to the window. Crane had arrived in was already pulling away down the drive. The dust it kicked up hung in the late afternoon sun. Mrs. Hayes spoke softly behind her. How did you know? Now what how? To speak to a man like that. To not Eleanor watch the dust settle, to not flinch. Yes. She turned, looked at Mrs. Hayes. Because the first man who looked at me that way was 44 years old and bigger than I was. He told me I should consider whether it was fair to his employer that my father had defaulted on a bond. I was 22. I had buried my mother 3 months earlier. I had nothing in my pocket but a list of properties my father still owned, and a sense that if I shook in front of him, he would take more than the bond. She paused. I did not shake. He left with the bond. He did not get anything else. Mrs. Hayes did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You have done this before. Not on this scale. The shape is the same." She turned away from the window. "Lock the front door at night from now on. Every window on the ground floor too. And tell Henry to walk the perimeter of the house at full dark and again at 4 in the morning." "Yes, ma'am." For the first time since Eleanor had walked through the front door, the ma'am did not sound like a question. It sounded like an instruction being accepted. It stopped working faster than she had predicted. Beatrice Sinclair arrived on the 23rd day. Eleanor was in the kitchen with Martha when Mrs. Hayes came in. Her face had gone several shades paler than her usual neutral. "There is a carriage on the drive, Luz. I do not know it. But the woman inside it I know." Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron, removed it, did not change her dress. The dress was clean enough. The dress was hers. Show her into the east parlor. Do not bring tea. Do not bring water. Do not offer her anything. "Yes, ma'am." She heard the front door open, the light step on the marble, the murmur of Mrs. Hayes's voice, then the parlor door. She gave Beatrice Sinclair exactly 2 minutes alone in the room before she walked in. 2 minutes. So Beatrice could look around. So Beatrice could see the open windows, the uncovered furniture, the herbs on the side table, the garden through the south glass where Thomas was working on the 11th tree. So Beatrice could calibrate. Then Eleanor opened the door. The woman was older than Eleanor had imagined. 32, tall, dressed in Boston silk in the color of dark honey, the kind of dress that announced the cost without naming it. Her hair the same color as the silk. Her eyes gray. Her mouth already arranged into the small social smile. "Mrs. Caldwell, Miss Sinclair, I hope you will forgive the unannounced visit. I was passing through the area on my way back to Concord. You were not." The smile did not waver, but something at the back of it adjusted. "I beg your pardon. You were not passing through. Concord is not on the way to anywhere that requires this drive. You came here deliberately. To this house. To this parlor. Please sit if you wish. But do not tell me you happened." Beatrice did not sit. She walked to the south window instead. Looked out at the garden. "He is pruning the apple trees." "Yes, Theodore told me once those trees would never be tended again. He was wrong, so I see." She turned. She did the smile again. "It had been trained for years. I came because I wanted to meet you. Properly. Letters can be cold. I did not want there to be any misunderstanding. Between us, what would the misunderstanding be?" Beatrice walked away from the window, came forward, stopped 4 feet away. Close enough to suggest intimacy. Not close enough to be aggressive, Mrs. Caldwell. "I have known Theodore for 11 years. I knew him before Margaret. I knew him during Margaret. I knew him after, I am aware. You do not know him the way I do, perhaps not, but I understand his ledgers better than you." There it was. Beatrice's smile finally moved. Not gone, rearranged, held in place by a different set of muscles. Eleanor watched it happen the way she watched everything, with attention, without comment. That is a sharp thing to say to a guest. You are not a guest. You are an interested party. Beatrice took 1 step closer. "Mrs. Caldwell, I have been a friend to this family for longer than you have been in their house. There are arrangements you do not yet understand. Arrangements Theodore himself authorized in conversations you were not party to. If you continue down the road you appear to be walking, you will create damage that will be difficult to repair. For everyone, including yourself, including myself, a woman in your position. What position is that? Beatrice did not answer immediately. She was choosing her phrase. Eleanor could see her choosing it. A woman whose family name was once respected and is no longer. A woman who came to this marriage with little. A woman who I imagine would prefer not to find herself, once again, without the comfort of an established household to protect her. Eleanor did not move. Inside her chest something was happening. Not anger. Anger came later. This was the colder thing that came first. The thing her father had taught her to keep behind the eyes and never let into the voice. The thing that helped you read the ledger when everyone else was busy reacting. Miss Claire, I am going to tell you something, and I would like you to hear it. Beatrice waited. You came here today because you have heard the word ledgers from someone in this house. Or someone in Boston. You came to look at me. To measure whether I am the kind of woman who folds when looked at. I am not. I have been measured by colder men than you with bigger stakes than yours. I survived being measured. You are not going to be the one who breaks the streak. You misunderstand. Do not. I came as a friend. You came to threaten me politely. You have done so. It did not work. You are free to leave. For a moment, Beatrice Sinclair did not move. The smile was still there, holding. But behind it, just for a second, Eleanor saw the other face. The watchful, particular 9-year-old Mrs. Hayes had described. The girl who could find one flaw in a tablecloth and remark on it until the hostess felt sick. Then Beatrice did it all again, bent it back into the social shape. You will regret this, Mrs. Caldwell. I doubt it. You do not know how this city works. I know how its accounts work. The city follows the accounts. Beatrice walked out. She did not slam the door. She did not need to. The cost of her walk across the parlor floor was already showing in her shoulders. Eleanor heard the front door. The carriage step. The wheels on the gravel. She sat down in the chair Crane had not been offered, closed her eyes for one breath, opened them. Mrs. Hayes appeared in the doorway. Half a sentence behind her usual timing. Mrs. Caldwell. I am all right. You were. I was honest. That is all. Mrs. Hayes did not finish her own sentence. She did not need to. She came into the parlor instead. Sat down on the bench by the window. Looked out at the garden where Thomas was finishing the day on the 12th tree. The light was getting gold across the top of the south wall. I have known the Sinclairs since Beatrice was 9. I told you, I have not seen her in that room before. In any room of this house. She wrote letters. She did not come. She came today. She came today because you have made her come. A pause, that is what she did not budget for. Eleanor looked at the apple trees too. The shape of the row was now visible all the way down to the 17th tree. Thomas was good at his work. So was his father before him. So had been Margaret Caldwell, who had picked the south wall on purpose, because the morning light came over the roof there at a particular angle in spring, and warmed the espalier before any other surface on the property thawed. Eleanor knew this, not because anyone had told her. She knew because she had been watching the south wall for 2 weeks, and she had seen the way it caught the dawn. She knew the woman who had chosen the wall. She had never met her. She would never meet her. She had begun to understand her. That was something. That was a great deal. She wrote the letter to Theodore that night. She had been avoiding it for weeks. Not because she lacked the information, because she did not want it to read like a wife asking for rescue. She was not asking for rescue. She was informing the principal of his estate. The way a competent manager informs a principal. There was a difference. She wanted the difference visible in every line. The letter took her one draft, Mr. Caldwell. I am writing to inform you of significant irregularities in the management of the Caldwell Manor estate, identified over the past 5 weeks in the course of my review of the household and operating accounts. Then the list. The unauthorized payments to Sinclair & Associates, the timber discrepancies. The acquisition letter recovered from a linen cupboard in this house. The visit 2 years prior from a man who claimed to be from the county assessor's office and was not. The recent extraction of 3 fence posts on the north acreage boundary. The visit this week of Mr. Edmund Crane, representing Sinclair & Associates. The visit, today, of Miss Beatrice Sinclair. Judge Alfred Whitfield's office is in receipt of my preliminary correspondence and has indicated the matter is worthy of review. I do not require your immediate response. I am writing to give you the opportunity to act on this information as you see fit, should you choose to authorize Judge Whitfield to proceed. I will provide him whatever additional materials he requires. I remain. Eleanor Caldwell. She read it twice. She did not change a word. She sealed it. She gave it to Henry the next morning, with instructions to ride to Boston directly. She watched him leave. She went back to the garden. His response came in 4 days. A brief letter, in a hand she had not seen before, direct, unornamented, the handwriting of a man who wrote quickly and did not think much about how the letters looked. Mrs. Caldwell, I have received your account of the estate records. I will be at Caldwell Manor within a fortnight. T. Caldwell, she read it once, folded it, set it on the desk. Well, she was not certain how she felt, because she had written the letter as a professional communication regarding estate concerns. He was coming because of the estate. That was appropriate. That was correct. She had not written the letter because she wanted him to come. She told herself that clearly. She believed it almost entirely, except she found herself that afternoon in the garden, asking Thomas to start on the south wall apple trees that were the furthest along, the ones already beginning to show what they would be once they had room to grow properly. She did not examine her reasons for that particular choice. She picked up the shears and went to work. Mrs. Hayes came out at 4 with tea. Eleanor accepted it without comment. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. You have done a great deal in 5. It was necessary. Mrs. Hayes sat on the garden bench, looked at the trees Thomas had finished. He has not seen this house in 7 years. I know. He has not seen any version of it that is alive. I know. He is going to walk in and not know what to do with himself. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the teacup. Then I will be ready to tell him what to do, Mr. Caldwell. Yes, you are not afraid of him, no. You should be a little. I am not certain I have the room for it. Mrs. Hayes did not push. She spent the fortnight working, not pacing, not waiting, working. She finished the inventory of the linen closet. She catalogued the silver. She had Thomas help her replant the southwest corner of the kitchen garden. With whatever could be put in this late in the season, she made lists of what would need to be ordered in early autumn before the first hard frost. She wrote to Cora in Cambridge a single letter. 2 paragraphs. Telling her aunt she was well. Not telling her aunt anything else. Cora would read between the lines or not. Cora always had. She walked through the dining room on the morning of the 8th day. The curtains had been beaten and rehung. The candles replaced. The shutters opened. A vase of garden herbs on the sideboard. She stood in the middle of the room a long time and tried to picture Theodore Caldwell in it. She could not. She had never seen him stand anywhere except at an altar. She had a portrait of him that ran 6 seconds. The seconds from when he had turned at the church to the seconds when he had walked out. She did not have enough material to imagine him in his own dining room. That was, she realized, both a problem and not. A problem because the man who walked through the door in 6 days was a stranger. Not a problem because she had been arranging a room for a stranger anyway. The room did not care who he was. The room cared whether it could hold him. The room could hold him. She found, walking out of the dining room, that she had decided to be ready for whatever man arrived. The one she had described to Mrs. Hayes. The one she had not been able to picture. Both. Either. Both at once. She let that decision sit. She did not write it in the journal. Some decisions did not need a column. That night, she sat at the desk in the east parlor and looked at the journal. 5 weeks of it. The figures and the columns and the names and the dates. The drafts of the Whitfield letter. The clerk's reply. Both of Beatrice's letters. The acquisition document. The page where she had marked the position of the pulled fence posts. She closed the journal. She had been carrying it during the day in the deep pocket of her work apron because she did not yet trust any drawer in this house to hold it. She slid it tonight into the chest with the survey documents. She locked the chest. She kept the key around her neck. She turned down the lamp. She slept. She dreamed of her father at the kitchen table in Boston. He was pushing a ledger toward her. He was saying the thing about two sides balancing. In the dream, she could not read the figures. The numbers in the columns were her own handwriting from the past month. In the dream, her father did not say anything about them. He just put his hand on hers and waited. She woke before he spoke. She lay in the dark a long time before she got up. Then she got up. She washed. She dressed. She went down to the kitchen. The lamp was already lit. Martha had set down the coffee. The work waited. She did the work. The 14th day arrived the way significant days often do. Without announcement, looking like the 13 that came before it, were seen as in the orchard when she heard the carriage on the gravel. She did not run inside to change her dress. She did not pull off her work gloves and smooth her hair. She finished tying the apple branch she had been working on, secured the knot, then walked through the garden gate and round the side of the house at a pace that was neither hurried nor performed. Theodore Caldwell was stepping down from the carriage. She got him in full daylight for the first time. He was taller than she remembered, lean in the way of men who worked with their hands, not desk lean, rope and timber lean. His coat was good wool, but not fussy. He carried no hat. He was looking at the house. He stood still for a long moment. Eleanor watched him register what he was seeing. Every window on the front face of the house, catching the late afternoon light instead of blocking it. The brass door knocker scrubbed and oiled, the cracked step replaced. Something moved across his face she could not name precisely. Not pleasure, not displeasure, not that careful blankness he had worn at the altar. Something older than any of those. It passed quickly. Then he turned and saw her standing 15 feet away in a work dress with garden dirt on her gloves. Mr. Caldwell, Mrs. Caldwell. His voice was lower than she had registered the one time she had heard it. You are in the orchard. I was. I heard the carriage. She pulled off her work gloves, tucked them into her apron pocket. I was not told to expect you today specifically. My letter said a fortnight. Your letter said within a fortnight. Today is the 14th day. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. An acknowledgement. Within and on are different things generally. Yes. Mrs. Hayes has your rooms prepared. Henry will see to your horse. Martha will have supper at 7 if that suits you. She said it, the way a competent household manager states the weather. Informatively, without warmth or coldness. Theodore looked at her for another moment. Then back at the house. The shutters. I opened them. The rooms needed light. If that was a mistake, you may tell me so plainly. He did not tell her it was a mistake. He did not say anything at all for a moment that stretched longer than comfort. Then he picked up his traveling case. He had not allowed Henry to take it, and walked toward the front steps. 7 o'clock, 7 o'clock. She went back to the orchard. Her hands were perfectly steady. The dining room had been waiting for him. Mrs. Hayes had been quietly adjusting the candles and the linen and the position of the chairs for a full week. Theodore at the head of the table. Eleanor at the opposite end. 8 feet of polished cherry wood between them. He ate without commenting on the food. She ate without commenting on his silence. Midway through the meal he set down his fork. You said in your letter there were irregularities. Yes. How long have you been tracking them? Since the 3rd day I was here. The 3rd day, the household accounts were the first thing I asked to see. She gave it to him then. Every piece. The Sinclair payments without a contract. The timber receipts below market. The acquisition letter recovered from behind the Christmas linen. The man who had been into the library 2 years ago claiming to be from the assessor's office. The extracted boundary post Vincit's in the North Line. The 1797 surveys now locked in the chest at the foot of her bed. The correspondence with Whitfield. The visit from Edmund Crane. The visit from Beatrice Sinclair. Theodore was very still. You wrote to Whitfield. I needed to understand the legal protections available to the estate. I did not ask for his intervention. I asked for information. How did you know to contact him? His name was on the original estate incorporation from 1797. He has been your family's legal man of record for 3 generations. She picked up her fork again. She did not elaborate, another silence. Different in texture from the first Sinclair. Yes, Beatrice's father's firm. She has been managing the social end, the letters, the framing of our marriage in Boston as a charity arrangement. Her family has been managing the financial end. They work together effectively. Theodore pushed back slightly from the table, looked at the candle at its center. Like a man who had just been told something, he half knew and had been not knowing deliberately. How long has Whitfield known? He received my first letter 3 weeks ago. He will want to see the surveys, and he will want to speak with you directly. You secured the surveys, around my neck initially. She reached into the collar of her dress and produced the key on its chain. The chest in my room is locked. The documents are in oilcloth. No one has accessed them. Theodore stared at the key. He was quiet a long time. When he spoke, his voice had dropped lower. Mrs. Caldwell, why did you do all of this? It was not quite because it needed to be done. And because no one else was doing it. I should have been doing it. Yes. She did not soften it. You should have. The candle burned steadily between them. Outside, the summer night was warm and full, and the windows she had opened were letting in the sound of cicadas. He picked up his fork again. He did not say anything else. But he ate the rest of his supper at his own table, in his own dining room. And she noticed that he looked once, only once, at the curtains Mrs. Hayes had rehung, and at the candlelight on the polished wood, and at the bread Martha had made with pride. She noticed. She did not comment. He did not leave the next morning, or the morning after that. He moved through the house, with the careful step of a man relearning a space he had thought he was finished with. On the second morning, he stood in the doorway of the east parlor and the uncovered furniture, and the open dough, and the herbs in the clay pot on the side table, and said nothing for so long that Eleanor, working at the desk finally looked up. Is there something you need? No. He looked at the window. My mother kept herbs in this room. In pots like that one, Thomas's, from the kitchen garden. I have been cataloging what survived. I did not know anything had survived. 28 apple trees on the south wall. And the herb beds are coming back if you give them room. He looked at her. Then he walked away. She heard his boots on the stairs. Heard him on the second floor walking the length of the hall, pausing at points along it. The way a man pauses when he is measuring the distance between what he remembers and what he finds. Mrs. Hayes appeared in the parlor doorway. He went upstairs. I heard him. He has not been upstairs in this house in 4 years. Not even when he came for the quarterly review. This last time was to close the rooms, after Margaret Eleanor set down her pen. Looked at the ceiling as if she could see through it. Let him walk. He found the ledger copies on the third day. She had left them on the library table. Organized, cross-referenced. Her journal notes attached in sequence. Because she had intended to walk him through them, and had been waiting for him to indicate he was ready. Instead, he found them himself. She came into the library, and found him with the first ledger open. Not the copy, the original, and her summary beside it. Reading with the focused stillness of a man who had just started that he had been stupid about something for a very long time. She sat down across from him. He read for 20 minutes. She waited. Then he turned to the page where she had documented the Sinclair payments. Walk me through this. She walked him through it. Precisely. Without grievance. She presented the numbers the same way she would have presented them to Whitfield. She was not telling him he had been deceived in order to hurt him. She was telling him because the estate which was breathing again required him to know. 4 years. The earliest irregular payment I can document. The acquisition letter is 3 years old. The relationship predates the formal payment arrangement. They were planning it before the payment started. The payments were how they kept the plan moving. Once they had established, you were unavailable. He looked at that word, unavailable. You were grieving. They used it. That is not a failure of your grief, Mr. Caldwell. It is a failure of their character. He looked at her. The same look from the dinner table. But rawer in it this time. You did not have to do any of this, no. I could have sat in the cold bedroom and waited to be retrieved. That did not seem particularly useful. Most women. I am not most women. The house needed someone to look after it. You were not here. So as I was, he looked down at the ledger. I should have been here. The words came out differently than they had the night before. Not as an apology directed at her. As something he was saying to the room, to the house. To the 7 years of absence he had let accumulate around him like walls. She let it sit. The next morning he went up to the attic. She did not know he had gone until Mrs. Hayes mentioned it at supper. Mr. Caldwell asked for the attic key after breakfast. He has been up there for 6 hours. He was still there when she went to bed. He came down in the morning carrying a wooden box. She saw him from the kitchen window crossing the back lawn. He went into the orchard, sat on the bench near the south wall. The box on his knees, she did not go to him. He brought it to her in the library that afternoon. He set it on the table between them. Inside the box were papers. Old papers. A bound ledger with a cracked spine. Letters tied with twine. A folded survey older than the 1797 boundary documents. These were my father's. He died 8 years ago. I have not been into his trunk since Theodore opened the bound ledger to a marked page. This is the agency contract he had with the Sinclair family. 1812. They handled timber sales for the North acreage that year. Father terminated the arrangement after 1 season. There is a note here in his hand. He turned the ledger to face her. She read the note. It was 3 lines. Discharged Sinclair this morning. The man is competent and the man is a thief. If I ever see the name on a Caldwell invoice again, it will be over my body. She read it. Twice she looked up at Theodore. He warned you. He warned me. I never opened the trunk. Why not? His face did something it had not done before in her presence. Almost embarrassed. He died the same year as Margaret, 4 months apart. I lost both of them, and I closed the doors on every room I could not stand to walk into. The library here, the attic here. The study he kept above his Boston office. I told myself I would open them when I was ready. I did not get ready. If you had opened it 8 years ago, I would have seen the warning. I would have terminated any future Sinclair relationship before they had any standing. None of this would have happened. He set the ledger down very carefully, like a man laying down a weight he had been carrying without noticing, the thing I have been telling myself for 7 years. That I lost Margaret. That nothing else mattered. It was true the first month. By the second year, it was a story I was telling so I would not have to live in the house she had loved. By the 4th year, it was a wall. And by the time you arrived at Caldwell Manor, that wall had cost me everything she had built here. And everything my father had asked me to protect. Eleanor said nothing. She had not been ready for him to be saying this, because she had been ready for him to defend himself, to explain, to minimize, to reframe his absence as something other than what it was. She had a whole list of replies, prepared for every version of that conversation. She did not have a reply prepared for the man who simply named his own failure and laid it on a library table next to a ledger his father had warned him about 8 years ago. She did the only thing she could think of. She reached across the table and put her hand on the ledger. Then we work from here. He looked at her hand. He did not move his own. But the breath he let out was the slow, quiet kind, the kind a man makes when he has been holding something a very long time and has finally found a place to set it down. That evening she sat at her desk in the east parlor for a long time without writing. She had been preparing for him to fight her. She had been preparing for him to disbelieve her. She had been preparing for him to choose Beatrice Sinclair's version of events because it was easier and because it required less of him as a person. She had not been preparing for him to choose accountability. She did not yet know what to do with it. She decided, after an hour, that she did not need had decide tonight. She closed the parlor for the evening. She walked through the hall on her way to the stairs. The grandfather clock was ticking. He had wound it that morning. She had not asked him to. He had simply done it, before breakfast, the way a man might wind a clock that lived in his own hallway. She put her hand on the case as she passed it. Brief. The wood was warm. The clock kept time. She let her palm rest there a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she went upstairs. She had not written about the wound clock in the journal. Some things did not yet have a column. Judge Alfred Whitfield arrived 8 days after Theodore's return. He brought 2 attorneys with him from Boston, both with the measured expressions of men who had reviewed significant documents before arriving and had formed significant opinions about them. Whitfield himself was 65, white-haired, the unhurried bearing of a man who had spent 40 years understanding what people were trying to hide from him. He shook Eleanor's hand before he shook Theodore's, which told her something about what her correspondents had communicated Mrs. Caldwell. Your letters were of the most precisely documented communications I have received in 30 years of practice. The numbers made it straightforward. The numbers are never straightforward. The skill is in knowing which numbers to read. They spent the first day in the library. Eleanor laid out the entire sequence. Whitfield read for hours. His face did the thing judges' faces do when they are calculating how serious a thing is: the boundary fence. 3 posts pulled. I marked the positions with field stones before any replacement. Survey the line tomorrow against the 1797 documents. The attorneys spent 2 days on it. They came back with measurements that matched her field notes to within an inch. Every stone, every angle. The 1797 documents were unambiguous. The boundary had never been in dispute. Someone had simply wanted it to look like it might be. On the 3rd day, Whitfield brought his findings to the library table. Page 22 contained a paragraph in his own hand. Precise. Unembellished. The irregularities have been identified and documented by Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell, whose meticulous records have formed the evidentiary foundation of the entire proceeding. She read it twice. She looked up and found Theodore watching her. He did not need to include that. He included it because it is true, and because it belonged in the record. The invitation to the Bradford estate in Concord arrived 2 days later, a late summer afternoon party. Half of Boston society had been invited. 3 judges, 2 members of the state legislature, several of the most influential merchant families in Massachusetts. Theodore received his invitation. Eleanor received nothing. Which was the point. He brought the invitation to her directly. She is convening her allies, yes, and she has left me off deliberately, to signal I can be excluded, that I am not a real Caldwell. What do you want to do? What are your options? I could decline. That confirms I have chosen your account over hers, but it happens privately, and it gives her room to keep working the social angle. Or I could go alone. And say what? The truth. He was quiet for a moment. I will not hesitate, Theodore. She used his name for the first time, and she felt him register the small precise shift in the air between them. She has known for 11 years. She knows where your hesitation lives. She will go directly for it. Then I need to not have any. She studied him. The set of his shoulders, the directness, the same directness that had been growing in him since the day he had walked into his father's attic. All right. Go. He left for Concord on a Saturday morning. Eleanor stayed at Caldwell Manor and worked. She did not pace. She spent the morning in the library with one of Whitfield's attorneys. She spent the afternoon in the orchard with Thomas. He had gotten the south wall trees, shaped well enough that you could see the form they were heading toward. Mrs. Hayes brought tea to the orchard at 4, which she had never done before. You are worried about him. I am not worried about Theodore. He knows what he is walking into. I was not talking about Mr. Caldwell. A pause. I was talking about you. Eleanor accepted the tea, said nothing. He came back Sunday evening. He looked tired, not defeated. The decision mattered. Sit down. Tell me. He told her. Beatrice had staged it carefully. Allies positioned. Tone set before he arrived. The first hour allowed for the existing narrative to breathe. Poor Theodore. Troubled marriage, grasping wife, unfortunate business confusion. Then he had arrived. He had walked directly to the center of the room, not to Beatrice, not to the easiest social cluster. He had asked for the attention of the room. He had gotten it, because he was Theodore Caldwell, and because he had not spoken in a social gathering with this kind of direct intention in 7 years. People noticed. He told the room that his estate had been subjected to 4 years of unauthorized financial extraction by a firm whose principals were present in the gathering. He told them Judge Whitfield had confirmed the irregularities and legal proceedings were underway. He told them the investigation had been initiated by his wife, who had arrived at Caldwell Manor to find the estate accounts in a condition that should have been caught years earlier, and had not been caught because the people responsible had counted on no one looking. And then he had said Mrs. Caldwell looked. She documented everything she found, secured the estate records, contacted the appropriate legal authority, and handled the entire matter with a precision and integrity I have never seen matched in 20 years of business. He had looked directly at Beatrice for the next part. I will not be taking advice on my household or my marriage from anyone who has spent 4 years treating my absence as a financial opportunity. Eleanor listened to all of it without speaking. When he finished, the library was quiet. What did Beatrice do? She left the room. Her father about 4 minutes later, and the rest of them. Whitfield is in court next week. 3 of the men there today will be subpoenaed. They know it. He looked at her. The room changed when I said your name. Not all of it. Some of those people will always prefer the easier story. But enough of it. She did not thank him aloud. She did not need to. He had not done it for thanks. He had done it because 4 years of his absence had been bought and paid for, and he had finally decided to refuse to sell another year. The court proceedings moved at the pace. Court proceedings move. Subpoenas were issued. The timber buyers' records were requested. 2 of the men who had been at Concord sent quiet letters to Whitfield's office within the first week. Beatrice left Boston. Eleanor learned this from Whitfield's clerk, who included it as an aside at the end of a longer letter. Miss Sinclair has relocated to her aunt's estate in Connecticut. Her father has retained separate counsel. 8 words about a woman who had spent 4 years building a careful architecture of control, reduced to a forwarding address. Eleanor did not feel triumph about this. She examined herself for it, because she thought it was the kind of moment where triumph was a natural response, and found instead something quieter, a settled completeness. The feeling of a column of numbers that had been added correctly and come out right. She told Theodore at dinner. He nodded once. Her father will likely settle before it goes to full trial. Whitfield thinks so too. Does that bother you? It would have bothered me more 6 months ago, when I still thought of the Sinclair family as people I had a relationship with. Now it is just resolution. Justice does not always look like what we imagine. No, he looked at her. Sometimes it looks like a woman at a kitchen table at 6 in the morning with a lamp and a ledger. That is a very specific image, Mrs. Hayes told me. She said that was the image she was going to carry from this whole business. I was not doing it to be seen. I know. That is why it matters. September turned to October, and Caldwell Manor turned with it. The hardwoods along the drive went red, then gold. Then began the slow letting go. The apple trees did what Thomas had predicted. Not all of them. The recovery was uneven the way recoveries tend to be. But 11 of the 28 had set fruit. Small early fruit. Not the full yield they would produce in coming years. Real and present and growing on branches that had been so tangled in neglect at the start of summer that Eleanor had not been certain they could be saved. She stood in the orchard on a Thursday morning and looked at those 11 trees. She heard Theodore come through the garden gate behind her. She knew his step now. 11, Thomas told me. He seemed pleased. He should be. He did most of the work. He said you told him which branches to cut. I read about it. My father had a book on orchard management. He bought it when he thought he might buy land upstate. He never did, but I read the book. Theodore was quiet a moment. Your father. Was a good man who made a bad investment and lost nearly everything, and spent the last 5 years of his life trying to manage the gap between what he had had and what he had left. He said it without self-pity. He taught me the accounts because he said a woman who understood numbers would never be an entirely without resources. He was right. He sounds like he was someone worth knowing. He was. He would have liked this house. I am glad you are in it. She turned and looked at him. The morning was clear, and the garden was full of everything they had put into it. I wrote to Cora last week. I told her I was staying. You had not told her before. I had not decided before. I have decided now. He looked at her for a long moment. Eleanor. All right. When I came back to this house, I told myself I was coming for the estate. The accounts. The legal situation. That was true. But it stopped being the whole truth somewhere or around the third day, when I walked into the east parlor and you did not look up or adjust yourself or perform anything. You just asked if there was something I needed, and went back to work. She remembered it exactly. I thought there is a person who is entirely at home in herself, in my house. In a situation she did not choose, and she is at home in herself. He looked at her hands. I have not been at home in myself for 7 years. I watched you be that every day, and it pulled me back. She said nothing for a moment, Theodore. When I came here, I came with one trunk and a piece of paper listing my legal rights as a married woman under Massachusetts statute. Because I needed to know what I had and what I did not have. I did not have warmth. I did not have welcome. I did not have a husband who looked at me, I know. But I stayed. Not because I had no choice. I had choices. I could have written to Whitfield by post and lived in this house as a competent stranger. She held his gaze. I stayed because in the second week I looked at this house and thought this is worth saving. And in the fourth week I looked at you and thought the same. He exhaled. The slow, quiet kind. I do not know how to be someone's husband the way it ought to be done. I knew once. I have been away from it long enough that I am not certain. The knowledge is still where I left it. Wound the clock. What? Every morning since the first day you came back. You wound the clock in the hall. 7 years it stood at 11:20. You came back. And you wound it. She looked at him. That is how I knew. Knew what? That you were coming back to yourself. That is the whole skill. Noticing what stopped. And doing the small daily work of starting it again. He reached out and took her face in his hands. Not with urgency, with the full present tense attention of a man who had finally completely shown up. I am going to do it right this time. I know. I am going to hold you to it. He kissed her in the orchard, with 11 recovered apple trees, putting out their first fruit along the south wall, and the house breathing behind them, with every window open, and the clock keeping time in the hall. You watched a story about a woman who was handed a cold house with a letter that had 3 sentences and no signature. The question I want to leave you with is not about her. It is about Theodore Caldwell. Because most stories like this one get told as if the woman was the only person who had a choice. As if she was the hero and the man was the obstacle. That is not what happened in this house. Theodore Caldwell was 33 when his wife Margaret died. 33 when he married Eleanor. In between those numbers he lost 7 years. 7 years he was alive but not present. He paid invoices he did not read. He let a woman in Boston manage the parts of his life he could not stand to look at. He was not a villain. He was something more familiar than that. He was a man who had decided that the easiest way to survive a loss was to leave the room. Any room. Every room. The library his father had asked him to protect. The attic with the trunk that contained the warning. The house his wife had loved. The marriage he had walked into without looking at the woman across the altar. I have known men like this. You have known men like this. Some of us have been men like this. The grief is real. The grief is not the problem. The problem is what we do with the rooms after. Theodore did not come back because Eleanor was beautiful. He did not come back because she was clever. He came back because she wrote him a letter that told him the truth without asking him for anything. In 20 years of being addressed by people who wanted things from him, He had forgotten what it felt like to be addressed by someone who simply expected him to be the man he had once been. That was the gift she gave him, not love. Just expectation. The expectation that he could still be a man capable of showing up. Here is the part I want the older men watching to hear. It is not too late. It has never been too late. It only feels too late because nobody around you is willing to be the first person to say so. If there is a room in your house you have not walked into since someone died, you can walk into it. If there is a trunk your father left you that you have not opened in 8 years, you can open it. If there is a clock in your hallway that has been showing the same time since the day your life broke, you can put your hand on it and wind it. Nobody is going to do it for you. The world has built itself a quiet economy around men who have stopped showing up. There are Sinclairs in every county. They are patient. They are polite. They will manage your affairs, and your narrative, and your distance from your own life. They will do it for years if you let them. Because absence pays better than presence in their kind of bookkeeping. The way out is not dramatic. The speech in Concord came at the end. It came after Theodore had spent weeks doing one small thing each morning. He wound the clock. He read the ledger. He walked the boundary. He climbed into the attic. He opened the trunk. He sat at the dinner table. He picked up the fork. Each of those things by itself was nothing. Together they were a man coming home. So I want to ask you, at our age, gentlemen, what clock in your house has been stopped longer than you would care to admit? What room have you closed? What trunk have you not opened? Who is waiting on a small daily act of return from you that you keep telling yourself you will get to next week? You can get to it this week. You can get to it tomorrow. If this story moved you, or if you recognized yourself in any part of it, tell me about it in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. Just your state. I read what people write. I want to know how many of us are out here doing this quiet work of coming back. To a marriage, to a child, to ourselves, if you know someone who is in the 7-year season of his own grief. Send him this story. Do not lecture him. Do not push him. Just send it. Let the story do the work, because here is the truth. Eleanor Caldwell did not save Caldwell Manor by being remarkable. She saved it by being there, early, quiet, with a lamp and a ledger and a willingness to look at what nobody else wanted to look at. And Theodore Caldwell did not become a husband again by becoming a different man. He became one by becoming the man he had once been. Before he stopped, the clock so keeps time whether you wind it or not. The hands do not move until somebody decides they will. Wind your clock.